Today's broadcast is sponsored, I believe, under the Yan family, Lilo Nishmas, Reb Chaim ben Reb David, who's Jimmy Dayan, who was nifter last week, and he Neshama should have an aliyah, and he should be a Melat Yosher for all of Klal Yisrael. And for next week we have some sponsors. Today is also the yard site of the Balatanya. So something happened over here. Today is also the yard site of the Balatanya.
So Kiva's not saying Tachnun today?
I don't know. Now, the Balatanya, he was one of the illustrious Talmidim of the Mezritcha Magid. The Mezritcha Magid was the person that took over for the Baal Shem Tov. And the unique gift that the Baal HaTanya had was his ability of persuasion, his ability to explain things very, very clearly. And he was known for that. So he was tasked by the Mezritcha Magid of writing the manual on Chassidus. And in fact, that's what the Tanya is. That's what Likutei Amorim are. It's the handbook for Chassidus. It's universally accepted by all Chassidim because it explains in a very clear fashion how Chassidus works. Now, the Mezritcha Magid once had a dream, and he told his Talmidim that they're mourning us in Shemayim, that we're not dominant enough, we're not active enough in the Teres Hanigla. We're too busy with Teres Hanister. So we need to fix this. So each of his Talmidim, his main Talmidim, accepted upon themselves an undertaking. The Balatanya accepted upon himself to write a sefer on Daled Chalkei Shulchan Aruch, which is Nigla. That's the Shulchan Aruch Harav, which is very respected. So that was he was makabel to do. Another one of the Mezritcha Magid's Talmidim was the Haflah, the Baal Haflah, and he was makabel upon himself to write a sefer on Shas, on the Gemara, which he did. And the third Talmud, I forget who it was makabel upon himself that anybody who has a shaila in any sugya, they can ask him, and he will sit there and explain it to them without reservation, whatever it takes, until the person understood with clarity. But at the end of the day, the Balatanya, he was poverty stricken. He was very, very poor his whole life, but he had tremendous ability to be masber things. He was very, very poor, and it brought down that the Talmidim of the Mezritcha Magid were always invited to the Mezritcha Magid for the Sidurim, and he provided everything: wine, matzah, whatever you needed. The only thing you had to bring of your own was your becher. So it was BYOB, bring your own becher. And the Mezritcha Magid was so poor, he couldn't even afford a becher. Not the Mezritcha Magid, the Balatanya was so poor that he couldn't even afford to buy a becher. So what he did is the Ramah does not hold you have to be machmer, but according to Beis Yosef, glass is not beleya. Therefore, you're allowed to use it interchangeable between chametz and matzah, melchus and fleishiks, and the Balatanya, having no other option, took this glass. So the seder is going to start. And the Mezritcha Magid gets up, and he's about to say Vayachulu, or if it was a Friday night, Vayerev, whatever the Kiddush was going to start with, and he looks scared and he sits back down. And this happened 3 times, and nobody understands what is going on over here. Why is the Mezritcha Magid getting up and then sitting back down? Until the Mezritcha Magid said that the Ramah has a hakpada, and the Balatanya understood right away that the Ramah was there. The Ramah obviously came to. I think the Magid said the Ramah da, and there's makbid, meaning he's makbid that you're using a becher that doesn't comply with his shita. The Balatanya was so humiliated, he got up and he ran, and he never came back. I mean, of course he came back after Pesach, but he was so embarrassed that he ended up leaving the seder because he didn't have even a becher. They lived in poverty, but they were still very great. Today we don't remember his poverty. Today we remember all the unbelievable svarim and contributions he made to Klal Yisrael. So Schus HaYogin Aleinu Val Klal Yisrael. Okay, let's see. It's also the yahrzeit of the Michtav Miliot, where Miliot Elazar Dessler, who was also a big, he wasn't the Balatanya, but he was a very big Baal Masber as well, the Baal Machshav as well. He wrote the Michtav Miliot. Today's his yahrzeit as well. One of the unique things about the Michtav Miliot was he quit smoking in the middle of his life. When his doctors told him that it wasn't healthy, he quit smoking cold turkey in the middle of his pack. In other words, he didn't say, okay, I'll finish this pack, like most people say, I'll finish this pack, and then I'm not smoking, I'm not buying anymore. Middle of the pack, he stopped, because he had a tremendous gevura, control over his neshama. No.
When the Borg came to America, they asked him how come he always keeps an unlit cigarette in his mouth.
Right.
So, let's point it out. So the Borg said, my father once told me that he would be happier if I wouldn't smoke. He's never let a cigarette again.
Wow.
That's what the Homer saying.
Beautiful. Okay, so let's see the Heilige Gemara. So let's just recap where we're holding, because we're in the middle of something. This whole story started with a machlokes between Rabbah and Reb Chisda. If someone cooks on Yom Tov, not l'tzorech Yom Tov, does he get malchus like Reb Chisda says, or do we say hoyel, since it's possible that someone might show up to his house that would need to eat the food that he cooked today, therefore he doesn't get malchus. That was the machlokes between Rabbah and Reb Chisda. And yesterday we learned a whole bunch of kashas that were asked to Reb Chisda, and now we're in the middle of challenging Rabbah. The Gemara said, how could you say the svara of hoyel? We have the case of somebody who ate he cooked a giranasha b'chalav and he ate it on Yom Tov. The Brisa says that he gets 5 malchis. One of the malchis that we say that he gets is havara, is for making a fire on Yom Tov. Because cooking the giranasha with chalav is not l'tzorech chaychal nefesh, because you're not allowed to eat it. So the Gemara said, we'll remove havara. Havara can't be part of the list according to the way Rabbah understands, because the hoyel says that you don't get malchus for that havara. And let's in its place suggest that the problem was muksa. The wood that he used to cook, the wood that he used to make the fire to cook on, was wood of muksa, meaning he had not prepared it before Shabbos. And since it says in the pasuk vehechinu as asher yaviu, we know that it's only appropriate to use wood on Shabbos and Yom Tov that were prepared. And since it didn't prepare it, it'll fall under the general lav of malacha of leisasa kol malacha. Now it's important to clarify. We know we have an Isra Muksa today. It's only midrabanan. So what is this Isra Muksa? So the Mefarshim explain. Our Isra Muksa, that's only midrabanan, is tiltal. It's just to move something around. However, to actually use it, like on Yom Tov, to make a flame with, that's going to be the deraisa that the Gemara is talking about. So the Gemara said it's impossible to suggest that for 2 reasons. The first reason why it's impossible to suggest that is the Gemara brought a pasuk from Yecheskel that was discussing all of the different things that you cannot use for a carbon. And one of the things that the pasuk says, it has to be mimashka Yisrael. Yecheskel Anovi said that anything that's brought on the Mizbeach has to be mutter li Yisrael. It has to be mutter for a yid to eat. Now, if you're going to, and it did not exclude muksa. The Brisa says it excludes tevel, which you're not allowed to eat, but it doesn't exclude muksa. But the problem is, if muksa is an isur deraisa, as you, Rabbah, want to claim, then it should have been, muksa should have also been one of those things that you're not allowed to bring a carbon out of. So it's impossible that the isur muksa is in fact a deraisa, even to use it. That was question number 1. Question number 2 is, you want to say that this is one of the 5 isurim that you're over when you cooked on Yom Tov, agira nosha b'chalav, and you ate it. Let's review one of the other isurim that the Brisa list, or that the Gemara says is included in this list. And one of them is so we have an issur here of mevashel b'yom tov. So one of the isurim is mevashel b'yom tov. Hamavashel gid b'yom tov, v'oichel like a chamish like mevashel gid b'yom tov. So we know one of the isurim on the list that you're over is for cooking the gid on Yom Tov. You want to add that there's another Yom Tov Dika issur that you're being over, and that is the issur of muksa. So I'm going to tell you that's impossible, because the Gemara says v'oid, and we're at the second wide line on Daf Mem Chesem Aral. V'oid ha'atu da'amrit. You Rabbi yourself said chiluk malachas l'Shabbos. On Shabbos, if you do multiple malachas, you'll bring multiple korban chatos. But v'ein chiluk malachas l'Yom Tov. By Yom Tov, if you do a whole bunch of malachas, b'helam achas, you don't bring multiple korbanos. You don't bring a korban at all. There's no chiyuv chatos. But if you did it b'mezid, you don't get multiple malchus. You only get one malchus. In other words, all of the different malachas that you do on Shabbos, you'll get punished individually for each malacha. But all of the malachas you do on Yom Tov, you don't get punished individually for each malacha. You only get one malchus for it. So we already racked up the issur on Yom Tov of cooking a giranosha. You're getting malchus for violating Yom Tov. So you can't add to the list the fact that you used wood that's muksa, because you only get one malchus. So therefore, this wouldn't be able to add to the tally of 5 sets of malchus that the Bryce is suggesting. So we need now to find the 5th lav, the 5th malchus that one gets when someone cooks a giranosha b'cholav on Yom Tov and eats it. Elazar Gemara afik havara. Say havara is out of the list. The ayil atzay ashera. Say that what type of wood did he use to cook the giranosha? He used wood of an ashera tree. And its lav is from here. It says in the pasuk, it's a lav to use any of, or even to take any wood, anything that's cherem, which is avodah zarah. I think it's talking about the dachas, and therefore there's a lav over here. It's lav number 5. Once you're introducing atzeh shera comes actually with 2 lavin. The nilki nami mishum v'leisavi so'eval beisecha, which also applies to bringing isura and not to either to bring it into your home, or if it's using it. Well, we'll have to learn over here that it's using it. So oibazoi, if you want to pick wood of irnidacha, wood of nashera, by definition you have 2, and it's not 5 lavin, now it's 6 lavin. So that's not a good option. Elo apikavora ba'ayil atze hektish. We'll say that he used the wood of hektish. As a rasa mehacha, where is the issur to use the wood of hektish? It says vashereim tisru from be'esh loisasum kain lashem alekecha.
They suffer that the Racha brought, you don't have the problem that they're both getting, that you're getting malchus for both of the one set of malchus.
You get 2 malchus because the 2 of them. Yeah. So the Gemara ends up saying, so that's a hektish. The Rishonim asked, so what about the Isser Me'ilah? There'd be an Isser Me'ilah there as well. On that, they answer, I'm sorry, which would add now another Isser. We want to have a total of 5, right? This was number 5. If it comes with 2, it's going to be 6. So the Rishonim answer, it's speaking where it was less than a Shavar Pruta. If you use less than a Shavar Pruta, there wouldn't be Isser Me'ilah, but there would still be an Isser of Loisasum Kain or Shamalakech. So at the end of the day, the Brisa that suggests 5 different lavin for one action, for one set of actions, is totally not relevant to our shaila. Of if you say hoyel on Yom Tov, because we're not talking about the isser of lighting a fire on Yom Tov. So that takes us to the end of this discussion. So I just want to review. Again, we had a machlokes between Rabbah and Reb Chisda if one cooks on Yom Tov, if one gets malchus. And the Gemara said that the machlokes is tolin if you say hoyel. According to Rabbah, you say, since it's possible that I'll be able to use this food today, we say you don't get malchus for it. Reb Chisda says you don't say hoyel. If you cooked on Yom Tov illegally, you get malchus. What prompted the Gemara to bring this up? We weren't discussing this parsha. We were actually discussing in the Mishnah a machlokes between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shua how to deal with being mafresh challah from an Isa Tameya on Pesach. And the problem was, if you're mafresh the challah, which is the kohen's portion, you're not allowed to bake that portion because you're not allowed to bake on Yom Tov, shaloi l'tzarech Yom Tov. And being that this is not allowed to be eaten because it's Tameya, you're baking not l'tzarech achila. So you can't burn this or you can't bake this section of dough that you separated as truma. On the other hand, if you don't bake it, it's going to become chametz, and you're going to be over on Bal Yirah and Bal Matza. That was the dilemma we had. So the Mishnah says that Rabbi Eliezer holds what you should do is don't be mafresh the truma or the challah while it's dough. Bake it, and then we'll say that every little, let's say you bake a series of bilkalach, every little bilka that you bake has a tiny little drop of truma in it, but you're allowed to bake each one because most of it you're going to eat. And then after you bake it, you could be mafresh to challah. Now you don't have to be cut off a little piece from each bilka and ruin all your shleimim. Afterward, you can say, well, I'll take one and I'll designate it. That'll be challah for the whole group. Rabbi Yeshua said, why bother? There's no Bal Yiro, Bal Yimotze over here at all. There's no Bal Yiro, Bal Yimotze. Why? Because it's not mine. It's Truma. It belongs to the Kohanim. There's an individual Kohen who might belong to. There is no individual Kohen because you haven't given it to any Kohen. It belongs to the family of Kahuna, and therefore there will be no Isser, Bal Yiro and Bal Yimotze. And our Gemara wanted to understand what is the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. What is the mechanics of the machlokes? What are they arguing about? So the Gemara suggested, which we're going to end up backing out of today, that the machlokes is whether or not you say a different hoyel. Whether you say hoyel, since I could have taken away its shem truma, because when I'm mafresh truma, I can be shoyel on it and say I made a mistake, and I can revert it back to tevel. So since I have the option to do that, so that gives me enough of a financial interest in it that I have a responsibility for the chametz. I'll be over Bal Yirah, Bal Yimotze, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer holds that you need to be mafresh the truma after you baked it, so you don't have that problem. But according to Rabbi Yeshua, just because I say hoyel, since I'm able to be shoyel on my truma and make it back into tevel, because of that, I'm over Bal Yirah, Bal Yimotze. You don't say Bal Yirah, Bal Yimotze for that. That's what we learned shot in our Mishnah until now. Today, things are going to change a little bit. Amar Rabbi Bachama, Hadu Rab Chisda v'Rabba, this machlokes between Rab Chisda and Rabba, whether or not one gets malchus for cooking on Yom Tov, machlokes to Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yeshua. Well, let's suggest that that's the exact shot in the machlokes of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua in our Mishnah. So how does that work out? Rabbi Eliezer Savar, Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that you could be mafresh the truma after you bake it, and you're allowed to bake it, the chulin and the truma combined, amrin and hoyel. You say hoyel. What is the hoyel that you say? The hoyel that you say is you're not allowed to bake truma. So if one of these bilkalach is going to be truma, then I'm not allowed to bake it. So how can I bake all the bilkalach? The teretz is we say hoyel. If I would have wanted, I'm able to say that one little piece of each of my 20 bilkas that I bake, one little part of it will be truma. The rest will be chulin. I'm allowed to bake it. If the vast majority of the bilka is chulin, there's only a little bit sliver of truma in it, I'm allowed to bake it that way. Since I could have been mafresh truma that way, will allow you to bake them all and then designate one complete bilka as truma. That's why Rabbi Eliezer is able to use this trick. Rabbi Yeshua Savar, lo yamrin in hoyel. Rabbi Yeshua holds you don't say hoyel, and therefore you can't use that trick. So this is a little bit confusing because this turns everything over on its head. We were learning that Rabbi Yeshua didn't need any mitigation because there was no problem. It wasn't mine. And it was Rabbi Eliezer who had a problem. Since I could be shoyel on my truma, it becomes now mine, and I'll be over on Bal Yirah. So the way we were learning until now, Rabbi Yeshua is the one who didn't have a problem, and Rabbi Eliezer had a problem that he had to solve by saying bake it before you're mafresh the truma. That's how we learned until now. Now the Gemara is turning itself over on its head, which is going to require some explanation. And the Gemara is saying it's the opposite. Rabbi Eliezer didn't have the problem because he holds you could say hoil, since I could have left a little piece in each bilka as the chala, I'm also allowed to just be mafresh one bilka on behalf of everything. And the Yeshua says you can't say that. Well, so how does he avoid the base problem of the fact that it's his? If Rabbi Yeshua agrees with Rabbi Eliezer that that you say hoil, since it's possible that I can be mafresh the truma, a little bit of each bilka, I'm allowed to just make one bilka truma. If Rabbi Yeshua holds that, what's he going to do? If he holds you don't say that hoil, what's he going to do about the fact that you do say hoil that I could be shoyal on my truma, and now it's going to be chametz in my rishus? I'll be everybody Rabbi Yomotzi. So the problem is what happened to the original hoil that the Mishnah explained that Rabbi Yeshua does not hold of, right? Rabbi Yeshua, the original hoil that made it into a problem was wise in mind. Why will I be everybody Rabbi Yomotzi? Because I could be shoyal on the truma. If Rabbi Yeshua doesn't hold to that hoil, which we already determined a couple of blot ago, he doesn't hold to the hoil, so this whole thing is not relevant. And if he doesn't hold to that hoil, so then how does he deal with it now? If he doesn't hold to that hoil, meaning if he holds that there is a problem with Bal Yomotzi, so the fact that he doesn't hold to this hoil, how does he deal with it? He just has to ignore it. So that's a problem that we're going to have to understand. Shot. The other problem is Rabbi Eliezer over there said hoil. He said hoil l'chumra, right? Rabbi Eliezer said you say hoil l'chumra, and he said that since I could be shoyal on it, I have a problem of chametz. So the question is maybe he says hoyel l'chumra. How do you know he'll say hoyel l'kula? Here we want to say that he says hoyel l'kula as well. So we have an issue that we have to work out over here, and that is, according to Rabbi Yeshua, if the whole basis of his reason to argue in Rabbi Eliezer is because he doesn't allow you to say hoyel, and therefore you cannot use this remedy of being mafresh the truma after you bake it. If he doesn't say hoyel here, he surely doesn't say hoyel over there, and therefore we're going to have the problem of. I'm sorry, I got mixed up. Forget. If you want to say that Yeshua is even handling with whether or not you're allowed to say hoyel to be able to be mafresh the truma after you bake it, then by definition he holds that you do say the hoyel l'chumra, and you do say that there was a problem of it being my chametz. So we have to work that out, and we'll work it out shortly. Rashi explains it very nicely, and Rashi ends up changing the understanding of the machlokes to help everything make sense. So let's see this in a second. Amar Rami Bachama, Rabbi Chisda, Rabbi Machlokes, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shuri. Rabbi Eliezer Savar, I'm reading hoyel. Rabbi Eliezer says say hoyel, and therefore it's a perfect remedy. I have all of my bilkalach, and I'll bake him in the oven. I won't be mafresh to truma. I have the option to say one little bit of each bilka is truma, and I'll say since I could be mafresh that way, even though at the end I just picked one full bilka and made it truma, nevertheless it's still allowed to be done. You cannot say that. You're not allowed to say that since I could have been mafresh a little bit of each bilka, I'm allowed to bake all the bilkas. You don't say that. Okay, so to Gemara, you don't have a raya. Amar Papa, the Dilma, Ad Kan Loy Kamar Rabbi Eliezer Hasam. Maybe you cannot bring a raya from the case of chametz to a regular case of Yom Tov. Dilma Ad Kan Loy Kamar Rabbi Eliezer Hasam. Maybe why did Rabbi Eliezer say over there that you say hoyel, tamrin and hoyel, the beidna, the ka'idli tanura, when you're actually placing each bilka into the oven, kol chada v'chada chazi leila today. Technically, each one, if I look at it, I could say this is not the one that I'm going to be mafresh for challah later. One, eventually, I will be mafresh. When I look at each one individually, as I put each one in the oven, I can say this is not the one that's going to be designated as the challah. Aval hacha, but in this case, the la'archen hu dechazi, l'didei loy chazi. Here, for sure, when you cook this on Yom Tov, that you weren't allowed to, for sure you're not going to eat it. You're finished all your meals. You're 100% not going to eat it. Unlike by the case of Truma, each and every bilka you might eat yourself. But when it comes to Orchim, when you're cooking on Yom Tov, you're for sure not going to eat it. At best, you might serve it to a guest. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer will disagree with Rabbah, and he'll say you get Malchus for baking on Yom Tov, if it's not L'tzarech Yom Tov. And Amar Shisha B'Rei Davidi, let's look at the flip side. Maybe you don't have a right from Yeshua. Why did Rabbi Yeshua disagree with the hoil of baking the challah and the truma on Pesach? There's going to be one of these bilkis that won't be edible, not by him, not by anybody. It's going to be truma tameya. That's much worse. But in the case of cooking on Yom Tov, the chazi miyas la'archen, well, for sure the food will be good for archen. Maybe you say hoil. So the Gemara said at the end of the day, our machlokes, the Rabban and Pechista, has nothing to do with the machlokes of Rabbi Yeshua. But we still need to understand if Rabbi Yeshua is even having a discussion about how to remedy the problem of burning the truma, burning the challah on Pesach. By definition, it must be that he agrees that there is a problem with Bal Yirah, which is unlike the way we learned earlier. So, and we also have to understand, since he holds there is a problem with Bal Yirah, if there in fact is such a problem, so how do you solve it? At the end of the day, he said just ignore it. If you have a problem and you can't solve it, you can't just ignore it. So what is the Eitzah? So let's see Rashi. It's a long Rashi, but Rashi changes over Chad in the Gemara. Avol hacha, the kulu chazu la'archen. La'archen shchicha. And it's common that you have archen. Amrin hoyol l'meshayir, maybe Rabbi Yeshua would agree that in Rabbi's case is a hoyol. The ikasha for Rashi. Hadam Rabbi Yeshua, lo yizehu chometz shemisayir salav. Amal hoyol. Clearly Rabbi Yeshua does not hold of the hoyol because he said, I don't even need to be worried about the chometz at all. Just be mafresh the challah from the dough when it's raw, and if it becomes chometz, it's not a problem because it doesn't belong to anybody. So Alma Leslie Hoyle v. Boy Mitchell Allah. I feel the chumrah. You see, Rabbi Yeshua, even the chumrah does not hold of the hoyle, because you would say hoyle. Since if I'm shoyel on the truma, this dough now reverts to being mine. Now I should be responsible for the chametz for the Bal Yirah, which is what Rabbi Eliezer holds. Rabbi Yeshua didn't hold of that. So if Rabbi Yeshua doesn't hold that, you say hoyle, even the chumrah, the choshekin hoyle the hachalakula. Surely, how could you argue that Rabbi Yeshua over here would agree with the hoyle? Because the Gemara wants to suggest that maybe Rabbi Yeshua would agree with Rabbah that you say hoyle by Yom Tov. Why? Because here it's much better because it's roy for archem. It's roy for archem than a shchiach. So the question is, if Rabbi Yeshua does not hold of hoyle, even l'chumra, he surely should not hold of the hoyle when I'm using it for food. Zok Rashi loy dami. The hashtamiya lavdi dehi. So Rashi introduces a new svara. Yes, you're right. I agree. You say hoyle. You do say hoyle, and yes, it's possible that I'm going to be shoyel on my truma, and the dough will revert back to me. But you're not over Bal Yirah and Bal Yamotze with such a condition, because the fact is, if you didn't do that, so it didn't belong to you. You're not over an aveira because it's possible that you could have got it. You don't have it. So if we looked at them, Metzias, it's not yours now. There's no place to be over on Bal Yirah. No, you're not over Bal Yirah through a hoyle. We're going to slug this up in half a second. The Kachshamati took Rashi. I don't like this pshat. Why? Rashi is very pashut. The near be'enai, the ein hoyle bazeh, the davar she'ein shaloi. The name of hoyle v'boy ma'asilei b'shusha. This svara that you said that you could say hoyle, but when it comes to making something belong to you, when it actually doesn't belong to you, hoyle won't work for that. Hoyle, you don't make believe that it belongs to you if the fact is it doesn't belong to you, and that's what Rabbi Yeshua is saying. Normally, I would say hoyle, but to say because of hoyle it belongs to me, you don't say it. That doesn't make any sense to say that. You know why? The imkain hektish the kaimalon aval ateroya shel gavaya v'loy pligi Rabbi Lazar. Everybody agrees that if there's hektish is chomet in your rishus, you're not everybody Rabbi Matza, right? The problem is if you're going to say the hoyle, hayibayi parklei v'havadidei. If you say a hoyle that since if I was shoyel on my truma, it becomes mine, and that's enough to pin the Bal Yirah on me, well then hektish as well. If I would be pointed the hektish, it will be mine. So you're saying if there's any way for it to become mine, we look at it like it's mine. Well, how do you do with hektish? So Rashi now offers a new pshat in the machlokes between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shua that'll clarify everything. Zok Rashi, B'chumeduma the Pirish Hakosov Bereisha B'Shmaitza. We're going to have to go back to the beginning of the sugya and re-explain the machlokes between Rabbi Shua and Rabbi Elazar, and we're going to change the gears for the Gemara. So if we go back to Daf Mem Vav Amud Beis, the Gemara says the Gemara was probing to find the svara for Rabbi Yeshua, and the Gemara said, Rabbi Elazar said, "Hoyel v'boy itchal alei mamaynai." Rabbi Yeshua saver lo yamrin hoyel. Right? That's how we understood it. Rabbi Yeshua says, "You don't say since if I would be shoyel on my truma, I can make it a shuma." Yeshua says, "You don't say that." Zok Rashi, we're going to have to change things a little bit, and this is what we're going to change to. Hoyel v'boy mitchal alei legersinim. So we learned the Gemara. The Gemara was glorious. The whole shaila is: you say hoyel if I would be shoyel on. Scratch that entire idea. You don't say hoyel. If it's not yours, you don't say hoyel. And that's why by chametz of hektish, you're not over. And huladin, truma, you're not going to be over. It's not yours. Elahachi gashinim. Rabbi Eliezer savar amrin and hoyel. Rabbi Shua amar lo amrin and hoyel. So you don't say the hoyel that we're talking about is the hoyel v'boy Mitchell. That hoyel v'boy Mitchell is gone. It has no relevance because you never say that something is yours because you could have gotten it. And the proof is from hektish, right? Otherwise, you'd be mechuyev for chametz of hektish. But the right gear is very simple. Without anything about mitchell. This is how we would understand it. Rabbi Elazar savar shari lafusa. Rabbi Elazar holds you're allowed to bake this truma, the challah that you separated. You're allowed to bake, provided that you don't separate it until after it's baked. The afal gav, the soif. How can I allow you to bake all of these bilkalach? Lemaisa, one bilka is going to be a bilka that's not edible because it's going to be truma tameya. Nevertheless, Dr. Eliezer ain't kanish malach. There's no malacha. You know why? Hoyel the kol chada v'chada chazilay. Since as he's putting each bilka into the oven, he hasn't yet determined which bilka will be the one that's going to be the challah. So as he puts everything into the oven, it's legitimate to say that this challah is going to be edible. And as a matter of fact, it's possible that he can eat every single bilka partially. The machila mishko mikol chada purta. Technically, he doesn't have to designate one bilka to be challah. He could cut off a little piece of each bilka, which means every bilka he's allowed to bake because every bilka has a portion in it that he's going to eat. But so you say hoyel, even though at the end of the day I only separate one full bilka for truma, and kum d'chayis I wasn't allowed to bake that. But you say hoyel, since I could have been mafresh a little bit of each bilka, we allow him to bake all the bilkas. That's the kula of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Shua savar lo yamrin hoyel. You don't say this kula of hoyel. You know why? At the end of the day, one of them is going to be designated as challah. So you weren't allowed to bake them. Hilchach, therefore, even the toivas hanoah ain't a moment. We said the Gemara at first wanted to say that the value of the fact that I can decide which Levi, which kohen to give it to, there might be value to it. Rabbi Shua, there is no value to it at all. So Rabbi Shua maintains, I don't need any remedies, I don't need any mitigation, because I have no financial interest in the truma. So therefore, manachta ad ha'erev is a just let it become chametz. Let be mafresh the dough before, because you're not allowed to put it in the oven. Be mafresh the chametz. It's not yours. You don't have a financial interest in it, and therefore you could let it burn. Masha Enkein, we're going to have to say that Rabbi Eliezer holds that the toivus hanoah is moment. So we're going to have to revert back to the original pshat of toivus hanoah moment. Toivus hanoah ain't a moment. Which means, why is it that boys that are Levium are in demand, boys that are coming in demand, is because you can buy an aliyah for cheaper on Yom Tov. When your Edom comes to you for Yom Tov, instead of spending $500 for one of the regular aliyahs, you can pick up Kohen or Levi for $50, $75. So you see there's something called Toivus Hanoah moment. There's a value in if you have a son-in-law or a son that's a Kohen or Levi. The same thing is you can go over to your wealthy friend and you can tell him, your trumas and maishas you're giving away anyway. Do me a favor, give it to my item, and I'll give you $5 for it.
I'll do it like that.
Oil. Okay, so that's our new machlokes. So basically, according to Rabbi Shua, he doesn't like the remedy of Rabbi Eliezer because he doesn't say hoil, and you're not allowed to bake. You're not allowed to bake truma. So we'll revert to saying Tavis and in a moment. We'll rely on that, and therefore we won't ask you for a remedy at all. While Rabbi Eliezer is going to Tavis and a moment, and therefore he's going to require a remedy of baking it and then being mafresh it l'chala. You're ending up baking a bilka that's not edible. It's not a problem because I could have eaten each one and just been mafresh a little piece of each one. So now we have a whole new revolutionary pshat in the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua. So Zok the Gemara, a very interesting story. Amru Rabbanon kamed Rabbi Yirmiyah for Rabbi Zera. The Rabbanon said over this suggestion that we just logged up, but they offered a suggestion that maybe Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua are arguing in the machlokes of Rabbi Chisda and Rabbah whether or not you say hoil. The Gemara debunked it a minute ago, but there's still that svar to say that Rabbi Yeshua does not hold of hoil, therefore he would hold like Rabbi Chisda. And Rabbi Eliezer holds of hoil, so he would hold like Rabbah. So this concept, this idea, was shared with Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah Kibla. Rabbi Yirmiyah said, you know what? I like the pshat. It's a good pshat. Yeah, let's say that's the machlokes with Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua. Rabbi Zera like Kibla. Rabbi Zera rejected it, and we have reasons why you could reject it. The Gemara just offered 2 reasons why you could reject it. Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah told Rabbi Zera, how could you reject it? Milsa de kashalan v'asya kameshani v'may pligi Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shua. We've been struggling for years to understand what is the machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua. Hashta amrua mishmei de gavarabba, and now we were fortunate that someone shared with us a pshat in the name of a big Talmud Chacham, and we shouldn't be makabelet. We finally have a solution to our problem of so many years, and now you're just going to give it a vishuk. Amr lei heichi akabla. How can I accept this as being pshat in the machlokes, whether or not you say hoyel? That Rabbi Eliezer holds you say hoyel, and therefore you're allowed to bake it. And Rabbi Shua says you don't say hoyel, and you're not allowed to bake it. It's not consistent with the brisa that gives more information as to the discussion between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua. The Tanina, Amalei Rabbi Shua. Rabbi Shua told Rabbi Eliezer, L'dvarecha, according to you, Rabbi, Hareyu over mishum loisasa kol malacha. According to you, he's going to be over the issur of loisasa kol malacha. In other words, I don't have a hoil. I don't hold the hoil. V'shasukle. And guess what? Rabbi Eliezer did not respond to Rabbi Yeshua's comment. The Isa, if you learn pshat in the machlokes, is told if you say hoil or not. So Rabbi Eliezer had a perfect response. Rabbi Eliezer should have said, I hold the hoil. If that's taka pshat, why didn't he say so? Amr lei. So Rabbi Yirmiyah answered back, according to you, who claims that the only thing you look at in the conversation is what's explicitly stated, and you don't imagine that maybe something else went on behind the scenes that wasn't quoted in the Mishnah. It says in the Brisa, Amr Rabbi Eliezer told Rabbi Shua, according to you, and Rabbi Yeshua didn't answer. Are you claiming he didn't answer? We know that Rabbi Yeshua answered him because in our Mishnah, the Mishnah, the Tana lists off what the response of Rabbi Yeshua was. That none, he answered, this is not chametz that would generate an issue of Rabbi Matzah, because Toivus are in a moment. Ella, Shosek le bebraisim, had le b'misnisim. It's not fair to you that just because the Brisa doesn't list off the response of Rabbi Yeshua, that doesn't mean he didn't have a response. You see in the Mishnah quoted his response. So Hakanami, I can say Shosek le b'misnisa. Rabbi Eliezer in the Brisa didn't. The Tana of the Brisa didn't quote the response of Rabbi Eliezer that I held of hoil, but he answered him under a different cover. But avada, you can have that machlokes. The Mishnah only mentioned Rabbi Yeshua's response, but Rabbi Eliezer might have had a response. All we're saying is the Mishnah, the Tana, doesn't always quote the full conversation. And that what we've proven that the Tana doesn't always quote the full conversation, and it's quite possible that there was more to the conversation than what's quoted in the Mishnah and what's quoted in the Brisa.
say that by Rabbi Yeshua because it's stated in a different mission. Show me another mission.
Yeah, but you see that the Tana of the Brisa omitted part of the discussion. So once you prove that Tanoim will omit part of the discussion, I could stretch that even further, even if it's not in another Mishnah. So talk more about Tanya, Rabbi Omer Halacha Kabbalah, Rabbi Passos like Rabbi Elazar, they say Hoyel, Rabbi Omer Halacha given Beseira, but Beseira said you should plunge it into cold water. The Kamashir Isa, what is the maximum dough you could make and you're not worried it'll become chametz? Because when women are making dough, or anybody makes dough, they're working it with their hands. How big of a dough can you work completely with your hands that no part of it will become chametz? If you're working on the massive dough, you're not going to be able to make sure that every part of it doesn't become chametz. If it's wheat dough, then it's 2 kav. If it's barley, 3 kavim. So clearly, it's easier for barley to become chametz than it's easier for wheat to become chametz than barley, because with wheat we limit your dough to a smaller size. It's exactly the opposite. So you quoted a moment ago from Rabbi Shmuel that it's 2 and 3. In fact, it's 3 and 4. If it's bad wheat, and therefore it won't, you don't get a lot of dough out of it, so then you can use more wheat in the process of making your flour because your net yield will be less. If you're dealing with really good, thick, good wheat, then it's going to produce more. So at the end of the day, the size of the dough, they both agree on, both Lashonis agree at the size of the dough. The question is, how many wheat kernels will net such a size dough? Amar Papa. The wheat. That's right. The wheat dough made out of that much wheat. Amar Papa Shmamina. Garian chiti chesichta mechiti mal yasa. Tvei midegarian sare chesichta mesare mal yasa. You see clearly that the ratio between the bad wheat and the good wheat is worse than the ratio of the bad barley to good barley, because from wheat to barley, from good wheat to bad wheat, it goes from 3 to 2, from 3 kav to 2 kav, and by good barley to bad barley, it goes from 4 to 3. So the lohasam tilsa, the hachariva. By the wheat, we're saying that instead of using the wheat of 3, you could only use the wheat of 2, which drops you by a third. Masha'enkin, by the barley, we said, instead of using barley of 4, use barley of 3, where you're only losing a quarter. So you see the difference in quality between the different barleys and the different wheats are of a different ratio. Amarav, kava melugna lepischa. A kav from the city of Lugna, which is much bigger, even only 1 kav is the maximum dough that you're allowed to have. V'chein lechala. And a kav of a dough that was made out of a kav of grain from Lugna would also be enough to trigger the chiv chala. Back to Gemara, Vatanya, Chameshes, Revoyim, Kemach, V'oid, Tayovin, B'chala. We learned that it's 5 Revoy Akav that triggers the chiv chala, not 1 kav. So Chameshes Revoyim is 5 quarters. It's 1 1/4, and you're saying 1 kav Lugna does it. But Mahalikamar, Kav Melugna Inami, a high shurakoi. 1 kav of grain from the city of Lugnoi will be enough to create the same amount of dough, and therefore it will be a chiv chala. Amar Beis, Hani Nashi Didan. Our women, Nahagu Lamefa, Kapiza Lapisla. They only bake 3 revoyim at a time. Why did they only bake 3 revoyim at a time? Because they want to stay just below the threshold of it becoming chametz. And by using a smaller dough, they're a safer distance away from it becoming chametz. The problem is, we said a moment ago that the same shear that we're saying is the maximum amount of dough they could make, and we don't have to be worried that it'll become chametz, that's also the shear that you'll be chayiv in challah. So Amar Abaye, ma daitik l'chumra, you think that you're offering a chumrah by the fact that you're keeping your doughs small? It's a chumrah ha'asilu dekulahu, the kamafka la. By you telling the women, or by the women using a smaller dough to protect themselves from the Isra Chametz, they're also bypassing the mitzvah of a fresh challah. So who said that's a good thing? Amalei, that's not true. The Avdan Kirab Eliezer, they could still be mafresh challah using the method of Rabbi Eliezer. The Tanya Rabbi Eliezer, Haroida If you take bread out of the oven and you put it into a basket, so now all of your breads, even though you had different doughs, you made small doughs, but all together you have all your breads in one basket, mitzaref and lechala, it will be mitzaref to create a chiyuv challah. So they did do the chiyuv challah, but not while it was in the dough form. They were mafresh challah after they baked it from the bilkah. Rabbi Bidam Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Eliezer, halacha Rabbi Eliezer. Amalei var itmar Allah Amr Bishua ben Levi lashanu ala kikrei shal bavel shenoishchus zu mizu. Where do we say that you pass Rabbi Eliezer and you say hoyel? That's only when you bake a whole bunch of danishes together and you pull them apart. The bilkah, when you pull them apart, they grow together a little bit. You sort of have to rip them apart. They're somewhat connected. There you'll say that you could be mafresh one through manal. Avakakan, if they're individual loaves that don't get baked with each other, like a loaf of bread, so they're not connected at all, loy, then you wouldn't be able to be mafresh truma from one another. Even if there's completely individual loaves and you don't pull them apart, you could still be mafresh challah from one loaf on another loaf. We were talking about if they're all in a basket, so that the basket joins them, and therefore you could be mafresh challah from one bread on another bread. What if it was just on a flat board, but you didn't put it into a keli? With the flat board, the fact that they're all sitting on the flat board would also join them, that you could pick one for challah to represent everybody else. Ma'u, toich kli ba'in v'alaka, that you need to be inside a keli, and if it's a flat board, there is no keli. Oidilma aver kli ba'inan va'ika, or maybe as long as it's in the airspace of the floor of the keli, that joins them. The Gemara take it. Tanya Belezer Omer, Hasal Mitzarfen, the basket joins them. The oven joins them. That means even if they don't go into the same basket, if they're all baked in the same oven, that's good enough. Kikrei that grow together, you got to pull them apart like our bilkis, they will be in the tzaref. You can have 3 women knead their dough. Now those they had small ovens, and the oven was only able to accommodate one small loaf at a time. So 3 women could start at the same time preparing those. So basically, 3 women work on their dough. As soon as the dough is ready, 1 woman puts it in the oven. The other 2 have to wait until they're done. And then the second one puts it in the oven, and the third one puts it in the oven. Come to the third lady ends up having her dough sitting around a longer time. No, you have to make it like an assembly line. They can all be working with dough, but they're not all going to be at the same stage. Achas lasha, the first woman starts off kneading her dough first. The achas ayreches, and the second woman had already kneaded her dough, and by the time the other lady starts to knead her dough, she's already setting it up into a loaf. She's already braiding her chalas. And the third lady bachas oifa. So basically, a woman starts off being losh. As soon as she's losh, she moves on to the second stage, and she's ayrecha. She makes her chalas, and then she moves on to the third stage of oifa. And every woman starts 10 minutes after the other one. So they none of them have to wait. Their process goes along smoothly. The reason why you can't allow all women to work together and to start at the same time is because some people work faster, some ovens cook faster, some wood burns hotter. We can't control it. If you see the dough blowing up and it's becoming chametz, tiltosh b'tzayin, quickly cool it off with cold water. We'll see what tiltosh means. Lasha, he mikatefes, the woman who already kneaded the dough will start braiding her challah. The chaver to lasha, and now once she's at the next stage of mikatefes, her friend could now start kneading. Lasha tachteh. She can vacate the losh station, go to the mikatefes station, and her friend comes into the losh station. Then mikatefes he oife, and then what's going to happen is she's now formed her loaf, so she's ready to put it in the oven. The chaver to mikatefes tachteh, and then the woman behind her now starts forming her loaf because she finished her losh. But shlishis, and the third woman, lasha, she starts to knead. Oife he. Once she finishes baking, she goes lasha. She goes back to the beginning of the line. So you might ask, she's done. Why did she have to make another bread? So Rashi tells us that they had small ovens in those days, and the women needed to bake multiple breads. So this is how they would create the assembly line, one after the other. So he lasha v'chaver to oife dachta, v'shlishis v'katefes, v'choshes kalila goes around and around. Because as long as they're busy with their dough, it won't become chametz. Rabbi Kiva Aimer loikol nashim. Tanya Amar Bekiva. Danti lefnei Rabbi Gamliel. I asked Rabbi Gamliel. Yamdeni Rabbeinu. B'nashim zrizos or b'nashim sein zrizos. This that you allow them all three to work together. Are you talking about women who move quickly? Beitzim lachim or beitzim invasion. Wood that burns hot or wood that doesn't burn so hot. B'tana chama or b'tana tzayden. Amarli ein lach elamash shanu chachamim. The chachamim said you could do this, and you're allowed to let them all work together. And zaklau tipach tiltosh b'tzayden. If it starts to blow up, you're tiltosh b'tzayden. Let's see what Rashi says. I thought the Gemara tiltosh yodah b'mayim tzayden. She should dip her hands into cold water, b'stiktifena, and she should rub over the dough with cold water, which would stop it from becoming chametz. And I guess we could stop over here because we're running a little bit late.
Shkoyach.
Shabbos.
Shabbos. So Mitzvah we'll learn Matza Shabbos at 7:00.